They drive you up the wall. We drive you on the floor. They drive you
George
up the wall.
Clinton is an American musician, singer, and songwriter and producer. In the 50s, as a teenager, he formed a doo-wop group. For a while in the 60s, he was a staff songwriter for Motown. During the 70s, he was the leader of the Parliament Funkadelic Collective, which was basically a revolving door between two band names that were often basically the same musicians. And he led that whole thing. In the 80s, he started to have some legal issues with labels. So he ended up signing to Capitol Records as himself, so as George Clinton, but also under the name P-Funk All-Stars. I think that the legal issues have meant that Parliament and Funkadelic names were no longer viable. He released some solo albums, which to start off with were still basically the Parliament Funkadelic group of musicians, and he started to work as a producer. He has since then, which is quite a long time now, done all sorts of collaborations, including film appearances, several albums. Wikipedia lists 10 solo albums, although, as I say, the actual provenance of whether they're solo or not is a bit of a moot point at times. He's 81 and he's still alive, and it looks like he's still working. Hi, my name's Dan. So this was his first solo album, which actually wasn't really solo. It was basically the Parliament Funkadelic musicians, but because of the legal issues he was having, it was released under his name rather than their name. I'm reasonably aware of the Parliament and Funkadelic stuff. I don't know all of it, but I know a bit about what was going on there. The stuff that I have heard, I generally really like. But this is my first hearing of this album in particular. And so names that I recognise in the list of people who contributed here include the incredible Bootsy Collins on bass, Fred Wesley and Maceo Parker. And the album is kind of funk, but it's moved on a bit, or some of it's funk. So the first two tracks, I would say, are pretty much solidly funk with a kind of electro or say electronic sounds introduced quite a bit. There's a particular snare sound that's used for those two tracks, actually, I think for most of the tracks, which is I say a snare sound, it's actually halfway between a snare and a clap, and it's kind of like, I know that sound, I've heard that in loads of kind of funk disco stuff that was late 70s, early 80s, even into kind of mid 80s, that sound was around quite a lot. And so those first two tracks particularly I really like. It then goes weird. I mean, this is George Clinton. You wouldn't expect it to not have some weirdness to it, and it's got, enough even during the funk stuff is very kind of idiosyncratic. So the third track is a track called Pot Sharing Tots, and it's a bizarre kind of cutesy, almost comedy kind of kid pop song, as if it was like, Little Jimmy Osmond or something like that. But of course it isn't. But it kind of seems to have that kind of vibe to it. And then from then on, there's some tracks that most of them are kind of a bit more mediocre. They're trying to be a bit more pop, I think. That's my feeling. Except for Atomic Dog, which is kind of a return to the more funky disco stuff, which is good, which I like. So, it's interesting. It's at times quite unusual, especially if you're not used to the kind of weird sense of humour that George Clinton's got in the way he approaches stuff. it's when I listened to it the first time through, I wasn't paying attention to the date on the album, so I was kind of trying to guess. I had guessed it at about, from the sounds, at about 1985. And that's just because in comparison of the stuff that was starting to come through at that point from the in the kind of rap world and the new hip hop stuff, so stuff like Grandmaster Flash, and there was a band called Nucleus that I had a 12-inch single from that was just similar to this, very in the sound. But that was 3 years later than this, and I think that while it sounds kind of somewhat plastic and disposable at times, partly because of all the electronic stuff going on, actually they were kind of ahead of this curve of the stuff that was about to happen and come through. And in fact, in the reading that I've done, I have found out that hip hop collectively recognises a debt to George Clinton and his work. And how he brought things on. So I think this is part of that. I think the track, it's actually 2 tracks kind of put together, but is a big continuum. Loopzilla and Man's Best Friend, I think, is very much kind of leading back into the 12-inch single kind of area of things. And it's in the way that it's kind of continuum. It's a long track and it kind of evolves as it goes on. It's got similarity to videos that I've seen of Funkadelic or Parliament playing live, where they just get a groove going and keep going, and it looks like they're making it up as they go along. They're not. It's obviously choreographed and they know what they're doing, but it has this kind of chaotic feel to it, especially when you see it on the stage live, because there's just people wandering in to say something into a microphone and then wandering off and shaking a shaker, and it's just a big group of people, and it's just it's got this real party feel to it. And this album kind of continues that party feel, I would say, but especially the funkier tracks. So I quite like it. I felt like it got a bit disappointing in the second half of the album. The first half is better. But yeah, I'm up for a bit of funk. So that's what I think. Please talk to me and tell me what you think. I'd love to know. So do that using the comments box. That's it from me for now.
If we were just babies, a share in a cradle, I share a suckle my thumb with you. We wouldn't freak out like the grown-ups do. If I was one